very elaborate plan, as we would normally have for crowd control, but heightened in some respects by the concerns for acts of potential terrorism. As reflected by a number of the arrests that have been made in this locale in the last couple of weeks, that what we're always worried about is not so much what we know, but what we don't know.
That, of course, NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton talking about the thousands of extra officers who will be on duty this holiday weekend. The federal government is warning about increased terror chatter, but Bratton says there are no specific threats to New York. But Bratton did mention that the increase in ISIS arrests locally is causing concern. We're, of course, painfully aware that New York is always a top terror target, and nobody knows that more than our next guest, Bernard Kerik. He was the police commissioner during 9/11, as well as in its horrible aftermath, and he was there then, and he's here with us now. A little bit later, we're going to talk about your new book, From Jailer to Jailed. But first, I wanted to ask you about both the comments from the NYPD commissioner and just in a post-9/11 New York, what really the expectation of the public can be in terms of real security in not only the digital age here, but the 21st century?
I think most importantly, the NYPD is better positioned than any municipality in the country to provide as much security as possible. They've got the resources, they've got the intelligence, they've got the communications networks between the state and local authorities. They have, I think, the biggest terrorist task force, federal terrorist task force in the entire country. They also have intelligence operatives, New York City detectives internationally that feed their intel sources, their resources. So, they're far better positioned than, just about anyone. The problem is we, New York City, has to be vigilant, and we have to be successful at preventing attacks 100% of the time. The terrorists have to get through one time. That's it.
Is the hard truth, though, Bernie, that when you look at the idiot last week who climbed the Brooklyn Bridge and the rest, that there are so many hard targets in New York, forget about even soft targets, that practically the best way to do it is to do it before the fact, but with the lone wolves and the rest of the world here, we have to mitigate our expectations? You
have to, and I think that's the key. There's no way we know when and where it's coming. The reality is, when you look at the numbers, I think they've arrested about 30 people over the last week, predominantly in New York and New Jersey, ISIS-related, possible attacks.
Is that the nightmare scenario that they're talking about within Police Plaza right now, and also the agencies, which is the new form focus on the ISIS-related homegrown terrorists?
Here's the problem. People have asked me, do you think there could be another 9/11? I think we're beyond flying 4 planes into 4 buildings. But we don't need that. They don't need that. Tunisia, last week, Kuwait, and a couple other Paris, we had 3 attacks within 24 hours. If somebody walked onto a beach in Jones Beach with an automatic weapon and slaughtered 60 people and did the same thing in Seaside, New Jersey, and the same thing out in LA on the same day, I promise you the economic impact of that on this country is going to be devastating. That can happen.
I'm curious. Commissioner Bratton said that there were no specific threats to New York. How transparent was the information when you're in that hot seat? If you know that there's a threat, you let everybody know, or are there some things you keep to yourself?
There's some things you keep to yourself, but keep in mind, the Commissioner, Bill Bratton, and the members of Congress, the Intelligence Committee, you hear them over the last couple days talking about this. We have to stay vigilant. We believe there's a real possibility. Keep in mind, they're hearing about chatter over the internet, over social media that we're not going to have access to, we're not going to know is occurring. And the problem is there are tens of thousands of these conversations internationally going through social media, going through the internet, that they're trying to suck information out of. And that's when they see increases in that chatter, that's where you get, okay, we have to step up security. We have to look at it differently. We have to be more vigilant. We have to be prepared. And going into this weekend, we've heard it from the White House, from the FBI, from the Congress, members of Congress, from the police commissioner. You have to believe there's an enormous amount of information that these guys are acquiring that you're not going to hear about.
Commissioner, you ran the NYPD. You also were the corrections commissioner, and I'm before NYPD, and I wanted to
Right.
know about the Rikers, whether you think things can get under control. But let's put that aside maybe for the next segment. You have served as the top dog for the NYPD. What does your heart tell you going into this? And I know you guys don't deal with emotion for the most part, but does your heart tell you that something can seriously happen? And the video that's made the rounds around the world when 9/11 happened, Mayor Giuliani didn't basically know where to go, and you were the only protection that he had as the police commissioner, as the video showed.
You know what, Dominic? In a situation like there is today, my fear are the soft targets. My fear is the tourist sites. My fear is the transportation hubs. You have to look at what ISIS, ISIL, Al-Qaeda, the radical extremist groups, you have to look at what they do abroad. What do? They create diversions. They attack one place, they hit another. They attack one place, when everybody responds, they have secondary explosions. They're not going to do anything different here. If they get in and they have the ability to do it, what's the biggest target? The economic capital of the world, New York City. So that's what your fear, that's what my fear is.
Pivot a little bit, speaking of New York City and the safety of it. It's interesting. We've talked quite a bit, obviously, some of the national stories as released police and communities primarily of color with all the incidents from the South Carolinas to the Missouris and all the rest. But just the data. How safe is New York City now? I'm not even talking from a terrorist area. I'm talking day to day, because last month we were talking about a spike in numbers. Now we see the June numbers here, crime's way down again to record level lows. Is New York still the safest city in the country, or is it a different climate from where we were from a couple of years ago?
I think it's one of the safest large cities in America, if not the safest large city. I don't know the overall FBI numbers, for this year, but it's extremely safe. In dating back to 1994, look, we've had a 20-year success rate of continually reducing crime. 1990, you had 2,400 homicides. Last year, I think you had 371. There's no other city in this country that's had the success rate of reducing crime, especially violent crime and homicide. That being said, because it's so low, Commissioner Bratton and his administration has to be extremely concerned that the smallest spike is going to look like a big number.
I'm curious how you're going to answer this, because you were there, not at the moment of implementation, but certainly carrying out stop and frisk and quality of life crimes here, broken windows, etc. Yet, as we'll get into in your book, you talk about prisons being filled with nonviolent drug offenders. How do you mitigate the two, where one certainly participated with the drop in crime, but two, you saying that you got the wrong people in huge numbers in prisons right now? It seems that we're coming at it from two different positions. Can you have them both?
I think you can have them both, and there's a couple issues. One, I think stop and frisk is a tool that should be used for the police department. I think it's a necessary tool. I think it has to be monitored, can't be abused, and I think if it's monitored correctly and used correctly, it's a great benefit to the NYPD.
So do you think the current implementation of it, which is running at about a fifth of where it was before, is the right number? Or do you think the way it used to be, both under your old boss and even under Mayor Bloomberg, was the better number? Should we be stopping more people, or is the reduced number the right balance?
I don't know the exact numbers. What I would say off the top of my head is we should be doing more than what we're doing, because we're seeing an increase in shootings. We're seeing an increase in gun possessions. We're seeing an increase in homicides. That's not a good thing. When you see those spikes in shootings, that's a problem. That means there's more guns on the streets. How do you get guns off the streets? Stop and frisk is one of those tools. So that's an issue. As far as our prisons and our jails, one of the things I focus on in my book is not only first-time nonviolent drug offenders, it's people that don't need prison to pay for their mistakes. I was with young men out of Baltimore, out of Washington, D.C., 5 grams of cocaine, which is two sugar packs in a Dunkin' Donuts shop, 10 years, 15 years in prison. First time, nonviolent offenders. Commercial fishermen, caught too many fish. We turn them into convicted felons. A guy that sold a whale's tooth on eBay, convicted felon. Somebody enhances their income on a mortgage application. We turn them into a convicted felon. These people did something wrong, they should be punished. They should be held accountable. But there's ways to hold them accountable where we don't put them in prison, they don't need prison, and most importantly, where we don't turn them into convicted felons, because we are creating nationally a second-class society of American citizens by the millions doing what we're doing.
Well,
and I think it has to
I
stop.
want to talk about more on that on the other side. And obviously, we're going to talk about Mr. Carrick's book here, Spectacular Rise and Stunning Fall from Grace here, and how his experience in federal prison has changed him. More on that right after this.